we always are in the business of having to persuade people of a different point of view to get them on board with a new perspective. And if you know how to do that well, and I think the only way to do that well is with the power of story, you can be incredibly successful.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. My name's Rick Nusky. I just want to take a second of pause to thank you for joining us and supporting the show. I've been reading through the feedback. It's wonderful, it's warm, it's supportive, and thank you so very much for that. Keep it coming through. Now on today's call, we're going to learn a lot, not a little bit, a lot about storytelling as it applies to the workplace. And we're going to do that with the wonderful Mr. Richard Stone. Welcome to the show.
Oh, pleased to be here, Rick. Thank you.
Yes, it's absolutely my pleasure to have you here. Now, you and I were just talking about some of the weather events that have been happening. Where are you located?
I'm in the Atlanta, Georgia area, which is the southeast part of the U.S., and there have been these lovely storm systems moving across the southeast that have had tornadoes in them and all kinds of other severe weather and hail and lightning and thunder and chickens dropping out of the sky. I don't know, all kinds of bad stuff.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm hopeful that, we get some brighter days locally, and I'd love to, before we jump into the core of the call, which, by the way, for everybody who doesn't know much about Richard, you soon will. He is actually an author, he's a speaker, and he's also the CEO at his business called Storywork. And on today's call, along with many other topics, we're going to be talking in depth about his latest international best-selling book called Story Intelligence, and why every business owner needs to own their story. So I think with that, Richard, a very good place is to start with your story. We know where you live. Have you always lived there?
No, I lived for many years in the Orlando, Florida area. And my journey there was as a consultant. I did work with Walt Disney Ideas, which was on the back a lot of MGM studios for a number of years, and moved to the Atlanta area about 6 years ago. So, but I'm actually a Florida-bred person. You don't find too many people born in Florida these days. But I was born in Tampa, Florida, and I spent a good part of my adult life there.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I've been reading through your About page, and it is, just to say comprehensive would be an understatement, Rich. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. But I know that you are so very busy. I wonder, do you ever have any time to relax?
Well, actually, I'm heading to the mountains on Friday.
Oh, there you go. Wonderful. How long for?
Yeah. So I'm going to the Georgia, actually North Carolina mountains, which is just about 3 hours north of here. And there's a lovely area. There's Asheville, North Carolina. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yes.
It's nestled up in the mountains, a beautiful area. And we have a dear friend who's got a house on top of a mountain, and
Tough
I'm
life.
ready for a little rest. Actually, I've been working very hard without a vacation for a while, so this will be.
I'm pretty sure and certain that would be the case. Now, are you a hiker? What's your thing?
Oh yeah, we'll hike. We'll hike and eat and read, and I will cut myself off from all email.
Oh yes,
and just see whatever the rhythms, wherever they take us.
Yes, it's funny, given the experience you've had with technology recently, it's very much a well-welcomed rest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, I always like to talk a little bit more about the people behind the business, because as we all know, the fundamentals of business don't change, but what does change is the uniqueness of the individual that I'm talking with. I would love to, if we could, Richard, wind back through time and go back to your childhood. Now, when you were growing up, what was one of the things that you remember fondly?
Oh, gee, I wasn't expecting these. I wasn't expecting we were to unearth my childhood, Rick.
But we are.
Well, I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and as a kid, and it's funny, we don't change a lot even when we get to be adults.
But what do they say? Children in adults' clothing?
That's right. And as a kid, I loved playing all kinds of sports, and then, it depended upon what the season was, American football or American baseball or golf. And I still here at this point in my life, I'm still playing golf. And I used to play golf. We had a double lot, and we could set up holes around the house, but you had to some cases you had to hit over the corners of the house.
Oh,
Unfortunately, my good friend Paul McCloskey sculled a ball into my parents' bedroom window.
oh, good one, Paul.
That was the end of the golf. But I have very fond memories. We had all kinds of tropical fruit trees, and we had 2 gigantic avocado trees in our yard.
Yummy.
And every season, we would harvest those. We had a long pole with a can on it that had a stick, and we would twist off the avocados. We harvested so many avocados. Of course, we were eating them, like every night for dinner and lunch, and we were giving bags away. My mother would take bags of avocados to the grocer and sell them to him. So I have very fond memories of the trees. We had grapefruit trees and orange trees and mango trees. So it was typical tropical Florida.
Yeah, beautiful. So did you mention that you had pets when you were growing up?
We had a dog when I was much older. I had a chicken once.
Oh, really? I had a ferret, so that's kind of strange.
And it was like one of these cases where, here in the States, they it's a terrible thing they do, but they will dye little chicks different colors.
Oh, really?
And somehow I ended up with a little baby chick, and pretty soon we had a chicken like hanging out, around the back. and one day I came home, and my mother informed me that our maid had taken the chicken home because it really needed a bigger space. But I suspect my chicken was eaten.
Oh, that's wonderful. No,
it was a very perturbing experience. I'm still working through it in therapy.
I'll help you through. Now, I can tell that you are a naturally gifted storyteller, and I'd love to turn to that in a moment. But as you were growing up, Richard, did you have anybody that you thought fondly of that was basically like a mentor that was in your formative years that you looked to?
Well, it's so interesting for me. People say, well, who are the storytellers in your family? And I realized probably in some informal ways, my mother was a storyteller. She was also an actress.
Good fit.
But I think the real first mentor I had was really in college, was a guy named Charles Scott, who's still alive, and he was my philosophy professor. And Charles always had an open door for his students, and he was maybe the first adult that I knew who really cared about what I thought and felt. And it was fine just to come on by and knock on the door, and he was curious. And he used to smoke a pipe, and that pipe would start to billow up smoke, and the room would be filled with pipe smoke as he's listening and reflecting. And he was a Jungian psychologist as well, and he loved kind of exploring archetypes of ideas. And so Charles was a really important figure for me, especially as a young adult.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. This is where the value of the My Future Business Show really shines through. I appreciate you sharing a window into your life. And speaking of that, I'd love to talk about the books behind you. Are you an avid reader? Do you get much value from reading stories?
Oh, I read a lot. And when we moved here, I think I had shelves and shelves of books, and made a decision: am I going to read any of these books again?
Again, yeah.
So I did keep I've got a pretty good collection of folklore, which I love, and some mystical writings. We've got a fair collection of those things that we've maintained through the years. A few business books along the way, but I'm always reading. I'm reading. I just started a wonderful little book that is about it's about the difference between children's brains and adult brains.
Oh.
And what's so fascinating, we just think that adults are just sort of mature versions of children, but children are really different creatures. They're more like, there's a metamorphosis that happens when we become adults and we move from childhood to adulthood, and we leave something behind. And what I love about the notions in this book is that children are exploratory. And they're continually exploring the world, and everything is new, everything is fresh, everything is wondrous. And at some point, for many of us, that somehow gets turned off, that switch.
Yes.
And then we start relying as adults on what this author calls exploiting what we know. And we often are not open to new things and new ways of seeing and new ways of exploring. So for me, this is also as an artist. This is about staying fresh with your insights, and I think this is very important for people in business. Is we can easily get locked into seeing a problem or situation in the same way over and over again, and we put it in a nice box that's familiar. But it's not always useful for us, and sometimes it requires someone not in the system. That's why we hire consultants, right?
Yep.
They're not enmeshed in the world that we're in, and they can see things that we just can't see them. And they come in and they go, "Yeah, but why are you doing this?" You go, "Well, we've always done that, but why?" And you don't have a clear reason. Well, we did it 20 years ago because, but that's no longer relevant. So I love this notion of how do we, as adults, learn how to be children again.
Did you,
in a sense?
Yeah. Did you, when you were growing up, did you have one particular story that you remember fondly?
Well, Mark Twain, American author, The Tales of Huckleberry Finn.
Of course.
And I remember my father reading those to me, and I was so captivated by that story. And this young boy who was out, wandering the world and having adventures. So that to me was a pivotal story for me, I think, in many regards.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I wonder, did you have to go through that relearning? Did that I guess that wonderment of story get switched off for you as an individual as you grew?
Probably in some ways not, and I had a hard time as a young person and in college trying to settle on what I wanted to do with my life. I at one point I was in a graduate program in psychology, getting a PhD, and I knew I didn't fit there.
You didn't like
just didn't belong there. And I ended up dropping out or taking a leave of absence. It turned out to be a permanent leave to go off and study painting in Chicago.
Yes.
To my parents' horror, my mother wrote me one of these great kind of Jewish guilt letters. How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? And you're ruining our lives. And so there was this impulse for me to be expressive, to create things, and a lot of the adult world is not about creating things, but about producing things and fitting in and complying, right? And so at some point I recognized that I was meeting people who were in their 50s and 60s who were still waiting tables and doing carpentry, almost living hand to mouth, and so they could buy paint. And I thought, I just don't. That doesn't feel like a story that I want.
Yeah, at the end of the day.
I was trying to figure out what was the story I wanted. So I ended up coming back to Florida, and willy-nilly, it's a longer story. I talked my way into an ad agency.
Brilliant.
And I had no coursework. I knew nothing. And these guys taught me the business, but it gave me a place for me to be creative as a writer. And, I ended up directing photo shoots and producing commercials and all kinds of things. And so in many ways, that was very well suited to me.
Yes.
And I ended up owning my own business, though. I ended up at some point going out on my own and had a pretty big shop and was doing quite well. But I was no longer doing any of the creative work. And now I was running the show and worrying about cash flow and making payroll this week and doing all the new business acquisition and working 80 hours a week. And something in me said, this is not it.
Yes, again. Yeah, like a transition again.
It was a big transition. I made a decision to sell the agency, and Willy-nilly. I was out backpacking, so we were going up to North Carolina. I'd done a lot of hiking in my days and used to do, real hiking, going out into the wilderness.
Proper boots and all.
And, proper boots. Pack the way too much, with all everything on your back.
Pack mule, as they say.
Yeah, and I was coming back on a plane from, I think, like Wyoming, out western part of the United States, and there were two backpackers seated next to me, a couple. And, we were comparing trails, and you hike this trail and that trail. And at some point they said, have you ever been to the National Storytelling Festival? And I said, well, I have no clue. What is that?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, what are you talking about? And there's this town, it's in Jonesboro, Tennessee, in the northeast corner of Tennessee, not far from where we're going to be going for our visit in North Carolina. It's about 4 hours north of Atlanta. And they set up revival-sized tents in that town. It's an historic town. Most of the buildings were built in the 1800s. There's even a building built in the late 1700s that's been restored. No traffic light in the main part of the old town. And they set up these revival-sized tents all over the town, and they bring in the best storytellers from around the world. And it's a very folksy experience. And so at some point I got to know these people, and they said they were going up, and I said anything to get out of the agency, to get away for a few days. And
yes.
And I drove up with them, and I had an epiphany sitting in the audience listening to a farmer named Michael Cotter. And Michael was a third-generation farmer from Minnesota, and he was telling about the things he had witnessed on that farm and the changes that had happened over the generations and the way they were farming, and the tales were filled with mystery, and they were just touching. And I have a friend who was a writer who had come with me. She wanted to do a story on the festival, and I turned to her. I said, "This is what I'm supposed to be doing."
This is it. Oh,
It really was. It was an epiphany for me. I had no clue what that meant, but
you
not too long after. Yeah, I just knew it, and I not too long after that, we got an offer on the agency, and I sold the agency, and I embarked on a career in story. And it's not like you say, "Oh, I'd like to be a doctor." Oh, well, you need to go to 4 years of undergraduate school and another 4 years of graduate school. There are clear pathways for many professions.
Yep.
There was no map for this.
See,
there were some people. Yeah, there were exemplars out there, people who were sort of doing different things, but there was no map for how do you go out and do this and do something with it.
Looking backwards, you've now, since that time, written multiple books. You've got The Healing Art of Storytelling,
right.
Family Legacy, The Kingdom of Nout, and you co-wrote the Patient Survival Handbook, and now obviously with your latest book called Story Intelligence. I'd love to, if we could maybe pivot to talking a little bit about both story work, the business, as well as story intelligence.
Yeah. Well, in my journey early on with story, I recognized that I was not going to be as interested in just telling stories to auditoriums filled with screaming 6-year-olds. And I became much more interested in business and applications of story to business. And I had a client when I had the ad agency. He had the license for Sears Pest Control for the whole country. So he was really a substantial client for me. And I went to him and I said, "Hey, Chuck, I've got these wild ideas about using story to change the way we behave and manage people. You got a problem I could try it out on?" And he did have a problem. In South Florida, they have an ant. It's called a ghost ant. It's very, very teeny ant. And I don't know if you've got them in Australia, but if you don't do a good job of kind of eliminating the nest, the ants go nuts and they create two nests.
Multiplication.
The problem suddenly multiplies, and now you got a real problem. And the problem they were having is their guys were going out and they were not thoroughly doing the job, and so they were spending an enormous amount of money retreating.
Oh.
And then actually, and often going through a lot of trouble trying to track down the new nests and all those things. And it was costing him, he figured, tens of thousands of dollars. And I said, "That's a good one." So we tested out teaching managers how to use stories to influence their key technicians. And so that was the beginning of an attempt to kind of figure out how can you use story as a management tool. No one was writing about this in the 90s. When I first started this in the early 1990s, there were no books that were really out on story. Now there's one a week that comes out practically, it seems, but no one was talking about this. And I began looking at leadership, the question of leadership, and how do we become better leaders, and can story play a role in that? And then looking at how do you change organizational culture. And along the way, I was basically acting as a consultant at that time. I developed a relationship with the head of human resources at Disney Imagineering in Orlando, and he started inviting me in to do. Now, Disney is a story organization,
of course.
Their product is a story, and everything that they create, they think of it through the lens of story. Even the trash cans have a story. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, wherever you go on the park, it's not a trash can. It looks like a suitcase, that's a steamer trunk, but it just so happens it's a trash can, and so he understood intuitively what I was interested in doing. And started inviting me in to help him with some serious problems. So at one point, Walt Disney Imagineering, which is, as most probably people can imagine, is the creative side of the company. They come up with the rides and the theme parks and the themed hotels that are wild and crazy.
Love them.
And then there was another division called Disney Development Company, and this was mostly engineers, some architects, but these were guys who put in the roads, the infrastructure, the sewage lines, all that kind of, how to grade the properties, and and they would build the hotels, and the cultures in each of these sub-organizations were quite distinct.
Construction is very different.
Very distinct, and they didn't have a high estimation of each other,
to say the least.
The Imagineers looked down their nose at the Disney development people. They didn't have a creative bone in their body, and the Disney development people would look down their nose at the Imagineers. These guys could never bring a project in on budget if they had to. They were always cost overruns. Mm-hmm. And someone made a decision that they should merge the two divisions. And that's like oil and water. And so I got a chance to design a program that was essentially a story program to bring people together to share stories about accomplishments.
Yeah, wonderful.
So we mixed, at every table there were secretaries and engineers and Imagineers, and, there was all mixed, and it was very thoughtful about who we put where. And we had, you'd have someone talking about how he figured out how to move the bridge 200 yards and save the company $5 million. And another person who talked about, how he solved a problem with a ride to make it more exciting. And then a secretary who figured out how to change the filing system to make things more efficient for everybody. So the idea was to create deeper appreciation for for each other as human beings, and for what they each were bringing to the table.
You can see how that would be very useful. Is it any different, I guess, when you're trying to tell a story in a workplace than it is from your traditional out of workplace sort of hours stories? What's the difference? Well,
I think there's a big difference. There's so if you go to the National Storytelling Festival, they have a platform. It's a performance.
Yeah.
Okay. And even and the difference between storytelling and theater, the lights are not down. It's just there's no wall there between the actor and the audience. The storyteller is interacting with the audience. So in that sense, business storytelling shares something. I'm telling you something. The difference, I think, is it's not a performance. And actually, often in the world of business, if you say, I'd like to tell you a story, that's often can be deadly. People will go, they start looking at their watch and they go,
are you sure?
How long is this going to take? So I find it's not useful to say, but you say, let me tell you about how that's like something that happened here 6 months ago or 5 years ago, and not even use the word story. And what happens is now you've got the listener's attention.
Yes,
because you're speaking to something that they care about, and you're sharing a story that in some ways embodies a different point of view.
Yes.
You know, maybe the speaker's really enthusiastic about an idea. You know,
I can see this. I can see
hey, Rick, that's a great idea,
but have you thought about this?
Yeah, let me tell you, we tried that 5 years. Let me tell you what happened.
Would it be fair to say, Richard, that this was also about the art of conversation?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would say that if you wouldn't even feel like I was telling you stories. You were just talking with me. And out of that, one of the things that we learned, another project that I did with Disney Imagineering, they were interested in how knowledge was shared.
Yeah.
And so if you were an Imagineer and you had built a water park 10 years ago, and I was a new Imagineer and I was tasked to build the new water park that was coming on with the new theme park, and if I sent you an email and say, hey, Rick, I understand you built that water park 10 years ago. Could you share some of the lessons you learned? Well, you write back. It would be pretty minimal. It would be pretty cursory. You wouldn't say a lot. But if I came by and knocked on the door and say, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Richard Stone. I'm the new Imagineer. Do you have 5 minutes? And you go, well, sure, come on in,
Mm-hmm.
And you say, I'm having to build this new water park, but I really want to learn, what was it like for you when you built that old water park? Well, now you're going to be telling me all the dirty laundry and all the mistakes that you made, and 5 hours later, maybe the conversation is concluded, because you'll be glad to share and download your wisdom to this young designer. So it is in the art of conversation, Rick, and it requires great listening, good listening.
Mm-hmm.
So
two ears. What do they say? 2 ears, 1 mouth.
That's right. So we need to listen twice as much, and that's a lost art in itself.
Oh, yes.
We talk a lot about storytelling, but I tell you, story listening is maybe more important than storytelling.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been like I said earlier. I've been looking through all of your background information. It's just a wonderful tapestry of experience that you have now. Leading up to the pointy end of the call, I'm wondering, is this book apply to any businesses at all, and in any settings? And where can they get it?
Okay, so yes, and yes. So there are tons of examples from the world of business in the book. And one of the things we identify is that there are 7 powers of story. And I think that leaders need to know what those powers are, and they need to know how to utilize them to be more effective in their leadership. And so I've got examples from all kinds of situations. From the World Bank, I have a colleague, Steve Denning, who was at the World Bank, and through the power of story was able to engage the World Bank to change its focus away from lending to knowledge. Now, they still lend money.
Yeah.
But he had this wild idea back in the mid-1990s that the World Bank should become a knowledge bank. He saw what was happening with technology and thought, gosh, we have teams of people who go out all over the place and they learn all kinds of things, and then they get disbanded and assigned to new teams, and they carry their knowledge with them, and we have no way of tapping into that knowledge. And it turns out that a simple story, he was trying to figure out how to get people on board with this idea. And many people thought this was a terrible idea. They thought, we're a bank. What do? We lend money, for goodness sake.
We're in the money industry.
We're in the money business. And so how do you business? We always are in the business of having to persuade people of a different point of view, to get them on board with a new perspective. And if you know how to do that well, and I think the only way to do that well is with the power of story, you can be incredibly successful.
Yeah, I can tell. I can tell that I'm already itching to get my hands on a copy of this book, because I reckon we can always hone our abilities. It's a never-ending thing, is it?
That's correct. Yeah. So there is a lot more to be learned about the power of story. And so, people can get it on Amazon. Now, if you're in Australia, you're probably going to be limited to getting it on Kindle or getting the Audible version. I don't think that the print versions, I guess you could order them, but it's going to be pretty costly for the mail. But it's available on Kindle, and the Audible's available. Obviously, in the States, people can order the hardcover or the soft cover. And yes, I think what we've tried to do with this book is there's back in the mid 1990s, Daniel Goleman came out with a book called Emotional Intelligence. And that idea was not new. It had been around for a while. Howard Gardner at Harvard had been talking about multiple intelligences, and there were a number of researchers who were beginning to say, it's not all about our problem-solving skills that makes us successful. It has a lot more to do with what we do with each other in our relationships, and how we read each other, and how we understand ourselves emotionally. And I believe we're at the cusp of a new breakthrough in thinking, and that's hence the title of the book, Story Intelligence, is that there's a lot of research being done on our brains and how our brains work, and it turns out that story is integral to everything that happens in the brain. We're wired for it.
Yeah.
And once we begin to understand that we are story creatures, and that we're swimming in stories, then I think we have a lever to become what we talk about is become the author of your own story. And the word author and authority have a lot in common. So whoever authors the story has authority in your life. So I think it becomes incumbent upon all of us to take responsibility for the stories we're living in. And then likewise, on the other side of the coin is also to become better discerners and consumers of stories. We have to be responsible when we hear a story to say, wait a second, is that story true? Where's that story come from? Who's telling that story? And what do they have? What skin do they have in the game to tell that story that way? What's that ground? Are there any facts that back up that story?
Yes.
And we live in a dangerous time today because politicians are using stories to manipulate people. And so the question we all have to ask is, do we want to be manipulated?
Oh, no, goodness, no.
I don't think anybody consciously would say, I'd love to be manipulated.
No, today I'm going to wake up and be manipulated.
So if you don't want to be manipulated, you better become more knowledgeable about how stories work and how they can sometimes take up residence in our brains in a way that makes it difficult for us to see another point of view.
Thank you, Richard. I'm sitting here just flabbergasted. There's just so much to take in. There are so many, I guess, dimensions to storytelling, both from the listener's perspective as well as the storyteller themselves. Now, when somebody wants to connect with you, they might want to learn more about you personally. What is the website they're going to find, and will they find any more details about the book there?
Oh, sure. They can go to storyintelligence.com. It's spelled just like it sounds, the word story, and intelligence.com.
Easy.
There's details on ordering the book there, but we have lots of resources on the website, blogs. I'm doing almost a weekly interview myself with people who have expertise on story. And if anyone's a coach out there, I just posted up one with a guy named Sam McGill, who's a coach of coaches. And it's a fabulous interview about the poetics of coaching and the importance of story. So there's plenty of resources on storyintelligence.com for them.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm loving this call. I've loved every second of it. I know that there's a great deal more to learn for anybody who is listening to this call today. You can either go to storywork.com and check out Richard's information there, as well as storyintelligence.com. No matter where you find this post, you will find the links back to either one or the other of those websites. And with that all being said, Richard, thank you so very much for spending some time with me on the My Future Business show today.
Thanks so much, Rick. Great being here.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call,
Then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.